Okay, this is a continuation of our talks on terrains. You can see that I've just kind of made the terrain a little bit more moderate, a little bit more even, so that it takes to the trees a little bit better, and I helped clean up this a little bit. So we're talking about the middle button when we're talking about painting trees. Not paint to be confused with the little grass bits, because trees also include things like rocks, they include things like grass, are all under the moniker of trees. So the first thing that we need to do is find some trees. I've found this low poly trees and rocks. It's free on the asset store. It's a couple years old, and I've already given it an import here. So all you would need to do is go to your packages and import whatever you're looking for here. And that contains a number of things. There's a demo scene. I don't tend to use them. But mostly what we care about is the prefabs for the trees. So you've got rock trees and tree stump trees and other types of trees, because again, we're talking about trees being something that you can place, essentially. So let's actually go and do that. So each terrain independently needs to know what types of trees it's allowed to place. You go to Edit Trees, Add Tree, and you can select a tree prefab. Do make sure you pick the colored ones. So I'm going to pick this tree to start, a birch tree. I'm not going to add any kind of bend to it. And we have the ability already to place some trees. So if I just click once, it's pretty high density here by default. So if I go like this, click once, we get a couple of trees. Not so bad. Again, like the opacity, we're going to keep this very low and usually keep this pretty high. So many trees, small area. We could just cover the whole thing, and I'm holding down the mouse button, and it distributes the trees pretty much evenly. It'll do what it can. This never feels great. This is an old version, so these are old trees. Otherwise, you'd be able to enable more color variation, more tree width or height. Let's try out this random tree height and see if we can have any kind of color variation here. If there's any variation in height here, I can't perceive it myself. If you're using a more modern set of trees, as I think you should, especially they're not very pretty low poly trees. No offense to the creator, but they don't really suit what I'm trying to do here. Still, they're probably the first thing you'll find. We can affect tree density, and it'll add a couple more on top here. But it does remember that you've placed trees in that area. Eventually, you can have an entire scene made of trees. Oh, computer's starting to slow down after a couple thousand trees. But ultimately, we can also add second trees for that same kind of blending idea as the last video. So I'm going to add all of the trees. I'm going to add an oak tree. I'm going to add pine tree. Wish you could add multiple at once. Pine tree, just one type of pine tree. A couple types of rocks, which, as you know, are also trees. I got kicked out of the arborist groups when they had Hug a Tree Day, and I went out and hugged a rock instead. That's a terrible joke. That's not even a dad joke. Teachers never make good jokes. And now you can place individual rocks. We can place this down to, I think we had it at 10%. Place these. And then you can see that I can't place any more on top because it basically chooses where the trees can go based on the density. But if I increase the density even, oh boy, it really doesn't want to, there we go. These are pretty big ones. So it's difficult to place new trees on top of old zones that already contain trees. So what do you do if you just want to cover this in trees? Well, we have the Mass Place Trees tool, which is always the most fun to use. 10,000 is probably too many trees. Let's start with 100 trees. We place them, and they are placed in random locations around the map. It does look like there's a little bit of size variation. But this doesn't quite look right, so let's step this up to 1,000 and see how dense we've made this little forest here. This is pretty dense. It probably has too many rocks in it, to be honest, but it's certainly a start. This is the kind of thing where you would start crafting your environment. So I've got kind of this low-lying area here. So I'm going to lower my brush size a little bit, hold Shift, and erase some trees. I'm just going to do little clicks to make it a little bit less dense in the center here. So that perhaps, wow, that's a tiny evergreen tree, or massive other trees, we can start creating environments that contain, shall we say, hills and valleys and campsites and other things. So if you wanted to say a path, you could fire a path through here. And then combined with what we talked about last time with our smooth height, you could also really aggressively smooth on your path here. Make this much, much smoother, but it does not want to smooth anymore, so I can probably do this manually to kind of lower the terrain a little bit and make sort of a valley path here. Carve this out a little bit and clean it up. So you can have kind of a grove around some trees, maybe. Do a little bit more smoothing. I'm not going to get that complex with it. I'm just covering the sharp edges here, because that does not usually exist in nature. And people do take notice when things aren't realistic. I certainly do, but I also teach this, so a little bias. So let's finish taking out some of these trees. Paint trees. And let's finish off this last tree. Nope. Then we can, it's a little dense. I think we can probably do this a little bit better now that I know where not to place the trees. We can erase. We're going to mass place with more consistent trees, because you really only see one, maybe two types of trees around in this kind of environment. I don't want this oak tree, and I don't really like the look of the pine tree. So let's start with these three. We'll go into mass place, and let's place that 1,000 again. This seems to be a lot more consistent to me. And what I would probably do with the trees in the center here would be click some off. Just again doing that little kind of Bob Ross tiny clicks, so that there is a path that you can see, but it's a little bit more difficult to grasp. So if, say, your player is starting here, you can have some decent grove of trees. At least this is a start for something that I'm teaching in, I don't know, a 15-20 minute video. So you should eventually be able to create a really nice environment using these mass placement tools, because randomness is part of nature, and hopefully this helps you create something really nice. So go, create, do good.